Okay, well, welcome everybody to Conscious Cafe Global, our webinar today. My name is Gina Lazenby. I'm going to be hosting today's event, and I've hit the record button. This is our third Global Conscious Cafe event. Normally, we'll meet, like most people, in physical spaces, but we're moved to the online space now. And Conscious Cafe, if you're not already a member and you don't know about it, is a conversation space that Judy Piatkas founded back in 2011 when she sold her publishing business. Judy is been a leading publisher of many genres of books, but if you've got Mind, Body, Spirit books on your bookshelf, if you look on the spine, I'm sure you've got books with the Piatkas P logo at the bottom. During the course of Conscious Cafe, which was started as a space for conversation, for communities to gather, and for us to talk about things that matter and raise consciousness, people like myself came to the London events, and we have set up our own. So we've got groups now. I run one in Skipton, and so we serve Yorkshire and the North, particularly East Lancs. We've got them in Canterbury, Newbury, New Forest, St Albans, Oundle, and now in France, in En Masse, Geneva, Singapore, and just opening in Vancouver. So that's quite a wide time zone. We normally charge a small amount for our gathering events, and this event is free, but if you'd like to make a donation to help with our tech and the web costs of running this, that would be fantastic. And thank you to those of you who've made a donation. The consciouscafe.org website has a space where you can do that. And today's event is about creating a compelling LinkedIn profile, and we thought it's very practical. This Denise is going to give a really dynamic presentation. Of course, there's questions at the end. It's not quite the conversation style, but the timing of this is interesting because unless you're a key worker or your business is running from home at full tilt, I would imagine that many of you have spare capacity and time, or you're using this space, this global pause that we've got, to think about the new normal rather than going back to normal. It seems very clear that we're going to have a new world that we're living in, and maybe you're asking yourself the question, what's your role? How will that shift in this new normal? So this is a great timing for that. And Denise, her expertise is in LinkedIn. She's told me that she had a long business career, a couple of decades working in business development in software companies. And then I love this on your bio, Denise. You talk about having a recharge sabbatical, which you chose to have and went out to India and Nepal. And I would imagine that quite a few of us are either having that recharge sabbatical now, or at some point, I count myself in there, I've had a recharge sabbatical. And it's interesting because you did one thing before, you had this recharge where you say you cycled 5,000 kilometers. I'm just sweating at the thought of that. In the Himalayas, I mean, it's not like it's a flat road, is it? So that must have been a major, life-changing event, volunteering out there. And then when you came back, I also discovered a love rediscovered a love of photography, taking thousands of photographs, and then came back and created a visually focused communication business. And this aspect of what you're doing with LinkedIn, it's interesting. I think quite a few people on this call will have had a career, a moment, and another career, and perhaps we're all in that moment now. So this is really timely and topical. You talk about using your creativity and your people-curious personality, being interested in people, and sharp observation skills to help people create a really great profile. This is exactly what we need now. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the butterfly, however beautiful it is, cannot see its own wings. So this is what you do, isn't it, Denise?
Yeah.
You help people see what is on their wings and then communicate it in this forum. So I know we've got everybody on mute, but I think if we were in a room, we would applaud. So we'll give you a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. That's very kind.
I'm handing over to you, Denise, now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gina, for hosting me. Thank you, and Judy, for inviting me to speak to you today. It's a pleasure to be here in front of you from your own living rooms. For the main, I think there's a few offices, but mainly for your living rooms and your offices. So it's going to be a visual presentation. So all about how we can create a compelling LinkedIn profile. But this is how we create compelling you in terms of either for whether you're looking for a job or roles, or you're looking for employees, or you're looking to position yourself and your business. So the context, the channel, if you like, might be LinkedIn, but actually this description about you may well appear on a website, on your social media, on your printed material. So it's not specifically just for LinkedIn, but I am fine-tuning it in the context of LinkedIn. The message is should be the same throughout your contact points of where you're trying to reach people. So to give you a little bit of context there. Does this feel like social media to you? The market, the noise? One of the challenges that we have with social media is it gives, well, the positive is that it gives everybody a voice. The downside of that, it means it's just very noisy because there are a lot of noise, a lot of people to compete with, and there's a lot of noise to compete with. Okay. So hopefully that's a reasonable representation for you of what it's like if you're trying to get your messages out there to your target audience. I don't know if you've heard of Google's moment of truth. They've done some research and they found out on average, it takes 7 hours for one person to reach out and connect with you. They need to see 7 hours of your content on 11 different occasions over 4 different channels. So for example, you may have heard of Conscious Cafe through a friend. You may have seen a social media post. You may have attended one of the events or webinars. In terms of the know, like, trust dynamic, that usually builds up over time. Okay, it's very rare that you meet somebody and that you become best buddies for life. Okay, relationships usually build up over time, and so this is almost like the know, like, trust. So so this 7-11-4, so again it's 7 hours of content 11 different times over 4 different channels. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is how we can reduce those numbers, because if you've got your own business, you'll absolutely know that getting new contacts is hard work. It's not necessarily easy. You've got to do a lot of groundwork, whether that's a lot of networking, a lot of putting yourself out there, for that to slowly then build up and come back to you. So we're going to look at some techniques here as to how we can short circuits some of these time spans that on average it takes for somebody to come out and connect with you. First thing I need to say is the era of setting your shop front out in words in the following way, I'm afraid, is over. So if you start with all the services you offer, like an A to Z of all the services you offer, and say how wonderful you are and your business is, that may have worked when there was less noise, okay? But if you think of that penguin colony, if everybody's saying, I've got 10 years, I've got 3 years, 25, 30 years, whatever, it's kind of like, the question is, so what? You're being brutal, people's eyes will glaze over at that point because it's not interesting necessarily to them. To give you a specific example, this applies to everybody. I'm not picking out independent financial advisors specifically, I can assure you. So that would look like this sort of description. I'm a London IFA with 25 years experience. I specialise in pensions, retirement planning, and investment and tax planning. I'm sure you've all seen that approach. It may appear on your LinkedIn profiles as well. And don't worry, we've all been there. But because of the social media era, lots of noise, lots of clamour, we need to do a different way to connect with people. So let's show the example of what that would look like if we spin that round. We need to get to specific individuals, okay? You probably have an avatar or a type of client you're looking for specifically. And if you're not, I thoroughly recommend that, that exercise needs to happen, or it makes it easier. So if we've got these, what we need to focus on are client-focused messages, and they need to be clear and specific. So with our IFA example, how we twist that round is we'd say something like, John, the IFA, works with intelligent, savvy, discerning individuals. Strangely enough, this is just replicating when you meet somebody. Typically, if you're positive, you will get a positive response back, yeah? He's narrowing it down. He's looking for people specifically in their 40s and 50s who have invested for their future. So these people who aren't flat broke, they've already had some investment or have been investing. But what's their challenge? What's their problem? They don't have the time or inclination to get knee deep in the overwhelming financial maze of pensions and investments. This may apply to a good number of us. It can be quite bewildering, the financial arena. So strangely enough, if you call out the type of person you're looking for, they start to show up. If you try and appeal to everybody, you typically end up with nobody, okay? You call out their problem. As readers, typically, this is not egotistical, but we like to understand what are we going to get from this? What's the investment? What's the interest? Why is it going to spark our interest? So strangely enough, if you talk about your target client and their problems, they're more likely to respond, to be drawn into the text, okay? So these people, they're 40s and their 50s, they're discerning, they're savvy. Their problem is they don't have the time or understanding the financial maze, but they do know what they want to do with their life. Okay, they may want to cruise around the Caribbean when they're retired. They may want to go hiking across the Himalayas. Who knows what it is? But they don't know what the numbers are to make that a real plan rather than a dream. Okay. So I don't know if any of you, this appeals to you right now. Would you fall into John's target market? That can be a rhetorical question. You don't need to put hands up. But what you're doing here is identifying the person you want to speak to, and they're, fingers crossed, if they're that person, they're being led gently, line by line, deeper into the text, okay? So if you're not in your 40s or 50s, you may be getting, this isn't for me, and you're off straight away. From John's perspective, that's probably a good thing, okay? Because he's narrowing the market, he's making it clear who he'd prefer to work with, okay? So that's the kind of written perspective of what that would look like. But let me tell you a bit of a story. So if we go back to 1866 and South Africa, which is the diamond rush was on, a young farmer, excited about becoming rich, sold his farm and went in search of diamonds. Now, he sadly went bankrupt after a few years, and I'll leave the story there for various reasons, but he didn't have a good end. This is actually a true story, just to let you know. But let's go back to the farm that he sold. The new owner had a guest across. The guest inquired about this rock on the mantelpiece. The farmer replied, "Oh, the farm is strewn with rocks exactly like this." And the guest said, "That is the biggest diamond known to man." This farm became the Kimberley diamond mine. Okay? So why am I telling you that story? The moral of the story in this instance is the farmer who sold his farm was actually sitting on the diamonds, literally. Okay, he wasn't aware of that. Okay, and in business or as individuals, we're all sitting on our own diamonds. We don't need to go traveling around the world, even to the Himalayas, to find them necessarily. They're there within us. Okay, what often happens, and I love Gina's analogy earlier about the butterfly, is that it's the wood for the trees. It's very difficult to spot those gems of stories, literally. And I'll tell you another one of those story later on about that. But often we can be modest, or we don't have the time to dig into them and find those. But they're usually stories that we're very familiar with, so they don't actually stand out to us. Okay, whether that's your own differentiator, your own unique, your own gem, your own USP, your unique selling proposition, they're often either have dust covered on them or they're not fully drawn out in a way that resonates with your target audience. So my name is Denise Quinlan, as Gina was introduced. I do business development with a visual twist. Alternatively, there's a kind of diamond mining capability in terms of finding those gems within people. And I just have a curiosity that Gina mentioned, that for some reason I like to and I enjoy finding out these amazing stories that people have. And I typically work with individuals and business owners who are fantastic at what they do, but don't typically or don't necessarily articulate it in a way that resonates for their target audiences. Either, as I said before, they're either too modest or it's a bit of a wood for the trees thing. They don't see those fantastic diamonds and bring the right ones out necessarily that their prospects would absolutely love if only they knew about them. So this is similar to your butterfly analogy, Gina. It's hard to read the label when you're inside the bottle. Okay. Now, marketing communications specialists and chief marketing officers have told me the hardest person to market is yourself for this exact reason. Okay. If anybody disagrees with that, fantastic. It's quite a rare skill to have, I can assure you. So I'm going to run through today a bit of context, the fastest way to communicate. We're going to look at profile photos briefly. We're going to look at a written LinkedIn profile. We're going to look at illustrated client examples. I've got some other tips. I've got a free gift resource pack for you, which will support what I'm talking about today and some further in-depth materials. We're going to look at some next steps. And of course, we've got some time for some Q&A. So Gina mentioned I had a corporate career beforehand. So these are some of the clients I've worked with in capacity of Insightful Images. So I've got some large organizations and some smaller organizations, and I'll be using examples of my work throughout this to illustrate the presentation. We are talking about you specifically in this presentation, but there's always a context, okay? So we might be looking at your team or your associates if you have one in the wider context, but at the nub of this, it's about bringing out your values and your purpose. And of course, it's understanding who your target client is, and that exercise of who you're trying to reach is very much part of this. And then we can find the bits that stand out, whether that's you as an individual or whether it's your business. And those, those are those diamonds right in the middle there. But it's also useful to understand that customer journey and experience. So whether you're looking for a role, there's a certain amount of that customer experience, how you deliver on what you've said about yourself in your interviews and your on your CV or in your LinkedIn profile. What's that journey ahead, either as an employee or as an employer or as a business? So the context, the structure here applies to all of those. First thing to note is that pictures speak louder than words. So the fastest way to communicate is through images. I'm sure you're familiar with the phrase, a picture paints 1,000 words. Okay. A twist on that phrase I like is words add the facts, images add the emotion. And images add the emotion particularly when you have people in them. Now, the brain processes images 60,000 times faster than text. We're born with the gift of being able to see, but we're not born with the gift of being able to read. That's something we acquire as a skill. The brain processes images 60,000 times faster than text because we have to translate those lines and words into something meaningful, and that slows the process down. So because we're born with the gift of sight, we take it for granted, okay, this amazing power that we have. And because of our culture, society, being learned is something that's seen as great value. So we put lots of emphasis in business on the words and sometimes forget the emphasis on the images, which can be detrimental. Okay. So images connect you, particularly when there's a face or a person in that image. Okay, so I'm now going to go to, I was going to go to a poll, but I haven't got access to that actually, so that won't work. Oh yeah, I have got access to it, fantastic. So let me just launch a poll in a moment. Let me finish that one off. Right, oops, sorry. Okay, give me, if you could have a look at that for a moment. Now I've got a question for you on it, so let me just launch the poll. So the question is, who sees the face and who's thinking, I've no idea what you're talking about? So I'll just give you a little bit of time to, a couple more seconds to answer that, and then we'll share the results. Okay. So we've got a couple more people. 70% of you so far have voted. Okay. I'll give you a couple more seconds and then we're there. Okay. Fantastic. Oh, well done. Okay, so I'll end the poll there. So let's have a share the results. So 90% of you could see that there's a face, and a number of you aren't sure what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is something called, essentially, called pareidolia. So the light's essentially eyes, and that big gaping hole is the mouth. If you turn to the side a little bit, you might be able to see this. And this is actually a psychological thing, and it's called pareidolia. And it's actually the response to seeing faces and other significant and everyday items in random stimulus. So if you're somebody who sees shapes in clouds, you have got this pareidolian skill or ability. And if you haven't got it, it's something to be aware of when you're communicating with other people in terms of print and on websites especially. It comes from survival. So if you imagine you're on the savannah, you're in long grass and you're by yourself, subconsciously your brain is trying to check for faces, because if you see faces, you've got to work out pretty quickly if you need to run, flight or fight mechanism, or whether you're safe. So that's where they think this kind of ability to see faces and things has derived from. And I'll show you an example of where it's really useful. But essentially, it's like a Belisha beacon. If you've got a face, most people will look to, will be drawn towards that face. So it can be used really quite tactically on your printed material and in your websites. Between 65 and 85% of us are also visual learners. So you may be a kinesthetic learner, an oral learner, or typically obviously you're a blend of all of those, but the majority of people are visual learners. And for those of you like your stats, if you post on social media with an image, on average you'll get 94% more views than if you post without an image. Okay. If you think of newspapers, they've done this for years, if not centuries, is actually having those having images to draw the reader in, and that's for good purpose and good reason. So you may think it's all quite newfangled, this image thing, and then you go back 5,000 years and you see hieroglyphics. Okay, so hiero means sacred, glyphic is a carved engraving, and these are today's modern hieroglyphics. Okay, and carved engravings. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is there's no such thing as coincidence. We are very visual creatures. That's not changed. What has changed is the technology that enables us to disseminate our images and text to a wider audience more quickly. But of course, images are typically read more quickly, 60,000 times faster than text. So they have more impact much more quickly. A bit more science behind this. So this is a human brain. The brain has 100 billion neurons. Relative to the senses, 30% are devoted to one sense, 8% to another, 3% to yet another. Okay. So we're going to have another poll now. So the question is, 30% of the brain is devoted, or the brain's neurons are devoted to one sense. Is it A, hearing, B, touch, or C, sight? So let me just access that. Okay. So if you'd like to fingers on buzzers and vote as to which you think it is. So 30% of the brain's let's put neutrons, nice spelling this time, neurons are devoted to which sense? Hearing, sight, or touch? Okay. Just over half of you have voted, so 63% of you have voted so far. Get the last couple of seconds and get anyone else who'd like to vote, please vote ahead. Vote away. Okay, fantastic. I think we've kind of stabilized there. Okay. So if we share those results, there we go. So the winner is sight. Well done, everybody. I'm leading the witnesses fantastically with the presentation and the preamble to this question. Yes, 30% of the brain's neurons are devoted to sight. 8% is, oh, sorry, have I shared the results now? I haven't shared the results, yeah. So 30% is devoted to sight, 8% to touch, and 3% to hearing. So majority of the brain is devoted to sight for survival of the species, essentially. So everyday sustenance, we need to see food, find food every day. We need to work out whether we're safe or not, as mentioned, in terms of the pareidolia. So to survive, and literally to find a mate for the survival of the species. So a lot of the brain is used in interpreting images, but a lot of it is done subconsciously. And that's why we take it for granted. Okay. So the context of, your compelling LinkedIn profile. So how to get great employees and employers, clients or influencers. I mentioned that context in the 3 concentric circles of you, your team, and your clients. And it's all about showing what you do and why you're different. But we're obviously focusing here on you. I'd like to mention, as part of that free gift resource pack, I've got 10 profile mistakes, printed out document, PDF, that you're going to be able to access that turn your prospects away unwittingly. So 10 tips really in terms of your profile, the images specifically for your LinkedIn profile. And a short video series on how to feel more comfortable in front of the camera when it's getting in the way of business. So I've worked with Dr. Josephine Perry, who's a sports psychologist. She's often seen on the BBC Breakfast Red Sofa. So she's borrowed a technique from the sports world to help people overcome that challenge if they don't like being photographed, but it is getting in the way of business. So we're going to quickly go to poll number 3. So first impressions. How long does it take to form an impression of a stranger just from seeing their face? Is it 1 minute, 5 seconds, 1 second, or 1/10 of a second? I'm just going to launch the poll and you'll be able to vote accordingly. So first impressions, how long does it take to form an impression from a stranger just from seeing their face? 1 minute, 5 seconds, 1 second, or 1/10 of a second? If you'd like to vote away. Okay. Fantastic. Oh, it looks like 1/10 of a second is winning at the stakes. Okay, nobody's going for 1 minute. Very good. Fantastic. Last couple more votes going in there. Okay, I'll just share those results with you. So yes, the majority, you're very good at this, I can tell. So within the 1/10 of a second, a first impression is made, and that's typically done subconsciously. Okay, so 1/10 of a second is a blink of an eye, so it's super fast. That 30% of the brain is working hard to try and keep you safe, essentially. So it is super fast. But here's the really interesting thing, is that the brain doesn't differentiate between 2D and 3D. So whether it's meeting somebody in person or whether it's a photograph or film, the brain is still working out whether you're safe or not, or hopefully in a business context, whether you can do business with this person, whether you can hire them, whether they look like they'd be great for your team, so on and so forth. So, what's your first impression of this gentleman? Now, asking rhetorically in this sense, this was a LinkedIn profile photo. You may or may not see he's actually in a lift mirror. He's taking a selfie in the lift mirror. Now, given that the brain processes images 60,000 times faster than text, this is a headline for his LinkedIn profile. So he's in technology, but for me, it may work for you, it may not, okay? You may be his target audience, you may not be. But for me, it doesn't quite work because it looks very fly by night, okay? It may be perfectly good for you. But we're all telling a story with our photographs, unwittingly or otherwise, okay? So the moral of the story is make sure it's a photo that really does represent what you want to say to your target clients, okay? And this is where it gets tricky. It's a bit like you can't read the label from the inside of the bottle. It's very hard. If you put these photos to your friends and family, they're more likely, I don't know, kids can be pretty honest, can't they? It's good to have an objective sense, and it is very much for your, it's not your family shot, it's very much about who you're trying to target. So I've got some tips in the 10 profile mistakes that will be helpful there if you're to help step into your client's shoes. So I've got some LinkedIn profiles here, some clients I've worked with. So these are the before photos, and these are the after photos. Okay, so I'm sure may think there's a difference. Now I'm going to talk about this gentleman particularly because he's got medals. That stands him out. You may have seen them, you may not have seen them. But if we think of 7-11-4, those Google moment of truth, if you see shots of somebody who stands out a bit more, you're less, they blend into the background less, and they're going to stand out, a prick of your consciousness. They're going to stay higher up the list of things you remember. So if you keep seeing his photo, you're likely to need to see him less because he stands out more. So that's a subtle way of reducing that kind of 7-11-4 number that Google put out. So you don't have to be outrageous in terms of how you stand out. It might be as the young lady does. She's just nicely presented, if you like, for her target audience, dressed as she would be in terms of the clients, for the clients she meets, okay? So in the same way you have, if you write technical documents for one audience, you may have a kind of more summarized, light-hearted article for others. In the same way, you do the same for images. You're talking to a technical audience, how would you present yourself? If you're presenting to a you're trying to look customer friendly, how would you present yourself? Okay, so that same subtlety applies in images as it does in words. So we have young Alex here. So I worked with him. Here's the profile photos or the photographs we did for him and his business. Now, one of his clients, once on board, came back and gave this feedback. You'll laugh when I say I looked through the list and you seem to have the nicest, most honest looking face. They went on to say, I expect you think that's a strange approach. Now, that's not strange at all, as the kind of 1/10 of a second first impression occurrence. That's all going on subconsciously for most people. Okay, what's strange here is this person's actually written and expressed this in written words in an email. So that's the unusual bit. But we're all making that assessment as to whether we're safe or not. And as I say, hopefully in the business context, it's whether they can see themselves doing business with you. Now, this is young Alison, a prospect. Alison is a coach. She does career transformation coaching, and a prospect gave her this feedback. They looked on the International Coaching Federation website, and they gave Alison this feedback. I loved your photo. It showed so much compassion. Okay. So the interesting thing about photos is, yes, you can have a studio shot, Okay, you can have a 30-second in front of the camera disappear. If you get to know the person who's photographing you, you're going to relax more. They're going to get much more from you that your target prospect will see. Okay, so both the Alex photo and the Alison photo here, they've spent time with the photographer, getting to know them, understanding what they're trying to achieve. As with anything, and particularly if you don't like being photographed, that's really worth investing that time, getting more comfortable with who's photographing you. Yeah. So the key thing is to have a profile photo. Some people, either because they haven't updated their profile or don't like having their photograph taken, don't actually have a profile photo. Now this, as humans, doesn't work well for us because the brain becomes automatically suspicious. Why isn't there a profile photo when there's supposed to be one there? Okay, so as Airbnb state in their sign-up procedure, when they encourage you to put a profile photo, they say that they believe anonymity erodes trust. Okay, by not having a profile photo, we literally need to see the whites of somebody's eyes to establish trust. So if we can't see those whites of the eyes, that's why sunglasses aren't really helpful in photos as they are in real life, then having a profile photo really does help start establishing that trust. And again, in that 10 profile mistakes, I've got lots of hints and tips in there on how to go about having a good profile photo. Another thing I'd like to add in here is that face-to-face is better than using the phone, as we've all experienced probably with Zoom calls galore in this lockdown scenario. And research suggests that we talk for longer, we laugh more, and we're happier afterwards. Okay, but obviously don't overcook the Zoom calls because they are tiring. I'm not sure if you've seen this. So again, it's seeing other faces. It's really important to see faces. That's why I was encouraging some of you to, at the beginning, to show your face, because it does help establish rapport and trust from the off. So in summary, on this section, it is a visual world. People connect with people. It is very much the know, like, trust dynamic that's important. And we're not talking about positioning, if, for example, your business was selling commodity goods, then absolutely, they want to make sure that you're financially secure and that your goods are going to be delivered. But if you're trying to put yourself as unique and different by showing those diamonds and showing those gems, then you're going to be building up that know, like, trust kind of relationship. Hopefully you've learned that pictures speak louder than words. But so now we're going to look at kind of a LinkedIn profile specifically. So we're going to be talking about Patrick shortly. So we're going to have a look at Kirsten first of all. So this is her kind of cover page and profile photo beforehand. And this was the after. So just in terms of the profile photo, you can see the first one is a bit like the quick photo with the back of the office wall as the background. So in this second one, she's leaning forward slightly, she's more engaged, she's more comfortable in her skin. I think you can possibly pick that up from that photo. So again, that's getting to know the photographer really helps in that dynamic. But let's have a look at the written bit, okay? And LinkedIn, as you know, is pretty unforgiving in terms of formatting. So there's no bold, there's no bullet points, so you have to create those. So Kirsten was saying this was her before example of her profile. So she's an experienced marketing business development specialist with a proven track record delivering new business integrated brand and communication strategies. Okay, so that's all she had in her about section. We changed that to starting with this. In order to be successful today, today's companies need to align strategy, purpose, and ambition with long-term value creation for society, which is from the Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership. Now, you may see from her job title next to her profile photo that she's a managing director for Bouglé Limited and a sustainability consultant. So in the conversation I had with her in the briefing session, sustainability, not surprisingly, was a big thing. And she talked a lot about Cambridge Institute. So I looked at them and we found this quote that really, for me, in terms of how really aligned with Kirsten's thinking. So I don't suggest you necessarily all run and find a quote, but it's horses for courses. But this really underlined what Kirsten was about and how she felt about business and society and, you know, the planet, essentially. We then went on to say, I specialise in working with and helping leading companies evolve in response to global changes, more specifically with respect to challenges underlying the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I help businesses, I'll go into that. But she's showing some of her goals, well, she's showing some of her purpose and some of her values here. You know, the two concentric circles I had earlier, the kind of overlap in the Venn diagram. So she's then goes on to say, I help businesses align their strategy and purpose for good, build investment, benefit and business cases for creating social and in-country value, develop the business environmental, social and governance policies. And she's an advocate for change, helps widen the perspective and deepen the business social responsibility, engagement and links within their community, in the countries in which they operate and impact globally, so on and so forth. Okay, so we're using bullet points, but she's saying quite clearly what she's about and what value she can add to organizations. And because she's got two roles, we kind of signpost people to another area. But she's also managing director of Buble, which is an award-winning social enterprise and community of 150,000 like-minded individuals addressing the challenges that parenthood brings, including finding work, personal and family life balance, a career break that wouldn't penalises savings and pensions and investments, managing information overload on parenting advice. And they bring that to life through events. So here, these 3 bullet points, she's clearly calling out who she's trying to attract. So people, parents, who've got trying to find that balance with work and family life. You know, people who are penalised by taking that career break and, you know, just that overload of information. So in the same way that IFA was calling out people in their 40s and 50s who've already invested, strange enough, if you state who you're looking for, as I say, they start to show up. Okay. Now, I know looking at LinkedIn profiles is pretty dense heavy, so I'd really recommend looking at Kirsten's profile, but I'll highlight just a couple of other things. Again, she's got her sustainability role that she talks about there. But this was her before in the experience area, and this is the after, okay? So again, she talks about, you know, she's a marketing communications leader. She's teamed up with angel investor Vivian de Tuchelec and transformed the enterprise from a kids activities focus to a content and events business model. Okay, so she's monetized, she's businessified the activity or the organization. So it's since become fast-growing, award-winning, and a resource and forum for parents. Okay, and again, she talks about who she's trying to attract here. So that's the big recommendation in your profiles, is to identify who you're trying to reach and just state that. Yeah, a lot of us don't. We may talk quite generally if we do at all, but it does need to be about your target clients. Yeah. And as I say, I'll let you go and have a look at her profile because it does get pretty hard work wading through text. Okay, but what I will say is what Kirsten fed back from doing this was this feedback. So thanks ever so much for the incredible work you did on both the headshots and the visual presentation in the LinkedIn profile. Your curiosity to understand who I am and who I want to work with in my different roles was key to the results. I could never have articulated this so well in words or images, and the tone was spot on for my different roles. It takes me to a whole new level of confidence to go out and link with new people and share what I do. It's an incredible difference it makes. Okay, and Kirsten was almost shy of actually commenting on LinkedIn because she didn't want to draw attention to her profile. It didn't really say what she did. So that's turned that around massively for her, which is good. So now we're going to balance the genders out here a little bit. So we've got young Patrick, his before and his after photo. So you can see just the profile photos. There's just a little bit of age difference there between the two photos. So keep your profile up to date because it does raise a red flag as to what else you may not be so up to date with. And this is again, the bottle and the label. Sometimes you might need a friend to say, does this really look accurately like me or not? Okay, so try and keep it up to date. Now, I'm not going to read this out, but this is his before. It's dense text, yeah? It's not inviting in any way. Well, for those of you who like reading, possibly it is, but yeah. So we changed it to this. So he's the flying entrepreneur. He's actually grounded at the moment, obviously for obvious reasons. So with entrepreneurial spirit at his core, Patrick takes his wide business and cross-industry experience to whoever he encounters on his frequent travels across the world's continents, whether he be on the Rwandan savannah, in a startup workspace, or traditional corporate boardroom. Okay. He would especially love to hear from you if you're ... Okay, an investor seeking a diversified strategy, real estate strategy in Australia or Asia and the US. An entrepreneur whose soul is eaten up living and breathing a great idea, an advocate for less regulation, particularly in Switzerland and Europe. So again, he's calling them out pretty clearly who he's trying to get hold of and speak to. And again, I'm not going to bore you with loads of text because I know we're short on time as well here. Oh no, we're not short on time actually, 12:32. We've got a bit more time, haven't we? To go through this. But he then talks about his business, his chair role, and what he's trying to achieve with that. He gives some examples of the 3 different types of audience he's looking to reach. So he's got some entrepreneurs there. He's got the Rwandan taxi owner, so some of the entrepreneurs, and then a bit more about the organization he's looking for. Okay. So I'll let you go and have a look at Patrick's profile on LinkedIn for a bit more in-depth detail on that. But this was his before experience, and this is his after experience. So I've focused on one company. Now, here's a top tip here. ST Real Estate Holding Inc. Whoever you've worked for or whatever your business is, it's probably worth stating a line as to what they do. Now, I've worked for Oracle, which some of you may have heard of, some of you may not have heard of. It is a huge company, it's a massive software company, but don't assume, even if it's a huge company, that everyone will have heard of it. If you've changed industry specifically, they may not know it. So it's always worth putting one line because people don't click typically. So if they click to find out more about it, because you've got a business profile on LinkedIn for your company, a small percentage of people will click. So make it easy for them to see the information, giving a summary as to what the company does or the business does. And here we've just picked out some key elements of what the organization does in terms of experience, trust and specialization. So you don't need to read that, but that just gives a flavor of it. So those are a couple of different styles, but the results of Patrick's work was, in terms of his contacts, so he was looking for investors, looking for diversified real estate strategy. He actually got, in 6 months, he got a 25% increase in people who were looking for a diversified real estate strategy. Okay. In terms of entrepreneurs, he got a 30% increase in people reaching out to him. And then I asked him the question, did he get any less, did the number of random contacts reduce at all? He said it still increased, but only by 10%, which I thought was kind of interesting, that it wasn't still the 25 or 30% amount of less relevant contacts. Okay. So some evidence there by stating who you're looking for, strangely enough, they show up. Be clear about who you're trying to target. So some other tips that we have here. You may see at the bottom here, we've got some, oh, that's gone a bit too fast. You can actually add text, you can add images, you can add video, you can add web links to your about section and to your experience sections. So in the when you go to your profile, you'll see this pencil in blue, if you can see that. that will come up. That enables you to edit your profile in terms of words, but it also enables you to add, as I say, the video, documents, or website links, or relevant articles that you may want to post about yourself on there. So if you've got some amazing research that you'd love to share with that's relevant for your target audience, you may want to put that on there. If you've got some great video about yourself, work you've done, or your business, again, you may want to attach that there. As I say, the majority of people don't click on things, but those who really are interested in what you do, they will research a bit more. And if they're looking, if they've got 2 or 3 businesses they could go to that seemingly all do the same, then of course those people will probably do a bit more research and click on those links. The stat is over 70% of people do their homework on Google and on websites and on the internet before they'll even make their first, send their first email or phone somebody to actually find out more about their services. So make that information available that's relevant to your target audience. So, gosh, we've whizzed through there a bit of context, the fastest way to communicate. We've looked at some profile photos. We've looked at some written examples and a couple of other tips. And I'll tell you more about the gift pack and how you can get hold of that. And we're moving on to the Q&A. So thank you for that. The gift pack of resources, I mentioned 10 profile mistakes. I've also got 5 common visual website mistakes that might be useful for you. The video series with Dr. Josie Perry, how to feel more comfortable in front of a camera, particularly when it's getting in the way of business. And I've also got a visual impact scorecard. So for those of you who've got businesses particularly, you can do a bit of an assessment as to how you're presenting yourself visually or visually, words and images. So that may be useful for us, a bit of a sanity check, really. So there's the URL. I'm sure we'll be sending that out afterwards as well. Yeah. But there's the free gift pack. You click on that, grab that and click on that, then you'll be able to download those resources. So you've been given a lot of information there, and if you download the free gift resource pack, you'll also get some additional, a good number of additional materials, so you can absolutely crack on and have a look at your profiles and see whether they're really speaking to your target audience. If you would like some additional help, then I've got 3 different packages available to you. So strange enough, that gold, silver and bronze. The key thing to note, I guess, is they all contain a briefing session, which is at least 90 minutes to 2 hours. I was just speaking to a client this morning, and it is very much a collaborative exercise in terms of finding those gems, pulling back those layers, getting the dust off, and finding those wonderful stories that really will probably stand you out massively. Okay, so the briefing session is really important in that. And that is very much about understanding who your target audience is as well, and why you're different, okay, where those gems are. So the gold session includes the briefing session. I write the profile for you, we have a review, and it gets fine-tuned. Okay, so there's a price there that's $525. We then have a silver package, which is partial DIY. So again, the briefing is there, but then you go and write the profile, and then we have a review, and I give my feedback on that, and you fine-tune, wordsmith that. And that's $325. And we have a bronze package, which is even more DIY, which the briefing is cool as always, but essentially you write the profile, and there's no review. Okay, so that gives you a flavour of if you need some additional help in that. And I've got a lockdown offer that if you book and pay a deposit before the 14th of May, there's a 10% discount, but that appeals to you. So that's something you need to do right now. So this is the scorecard. And if I have 5 free 30-minute strategy reviews, so we can look at your profile. So essentially, we can review where you are now and where you want to be. And if you want to book one of those strategy sessions, if you email me and then we can organise that for you. Now, I'm sure these details will be going out afterwards as well.
Great.
So,
wonderful.
Gina.
Well, I think people are formulating questions, and there's a question I had, and I think David has flagged it up about testimonials, because this is another forum for people to speak in their voice about you. And how do we get those? Can we canvas for them? Can we ask people to do that? What do you think about testimonials?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's hugely important to have testimonials. Absolutely. And some people don't like to ask, and it is a preference thing, but I would say most people are often willing to give them. So it's really useful to absolutely really useful. But in LinkedIn, you can actually, I would always, after you've worked with a client, ask them if they'd be happy for you to, if they'd be happy to write a LinkedIn profile for a testimonial for you. Absolutely. And there's actually a facility within LinkedIn where you can ask them formally, if you like, through the software. But
you can do that. I haven't seen that. You can do that on TripAdvisor. You stay somewhere and TripAdvisor will say, will you rate this place? Because people leave a place and then they forget, but that's embedded in the prompt. So is there a similar facility in LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's not quite as, it doesn't automatically go out after the service is finished, but there is, if you go to the testimonial place there, you can ask for a recommendation or you can give a recommendation. So literally you can find the person's name. So you can do it formally through LinkedIn like that, but I would always ask, the personal touch again, give them a call, or as part of the follow-up that you do with them, ask them to do that, because it does feel a bit, typically you'll get a better response if you ask in person than if you send an email or an
and don't you think, Denise, that if you have a particularly good rapport with someone, you could say, I mean, I've done this once in the past when somebody gave me a verbal, oh, this has been helpful, lovely. And I went, would you mind putting it on my LinkedIn profile? Yeah. And it kind of, she'd already written it in her head. So if we have a rapport with someone, we could say, would you mind putting that on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Or even more helpfully, if they've given you verbatim words and you've written them down because you're on the phone or on a call, and you say, write it for them and say, would you mind, because that makes it easier for them. It's less them having to think about it, and it is something they've truly said. So make it easier for them and saying, okay, this is what I understood you said. Please fine tune, tweak if if they want to. But yeah, essentially,
I think that's what people. It's like sitting in an exam. They sit there and they, what am I going to say? They get all formal, and they describe something really formal that they didn't actually verbalize. So writing it with them or for them when you have that level of rapport is really useful. So I hope that covered the requests from David when he talked about endorsements. I'm interpreting those as testimonials. I've got a question.
Oh, can I just finish with that?
Yeah.
And absolutely have a headshot of that person who's given the testimonial for all the reasons of pareidolia. Okay. So the Belisha beacon, majority of people are drawn to faces. So if you're drawn, if you have the headshot there, people will naturally look at that headshot. So if that person is your target, ideally they'd be your target audience as well. So people identify with people like them. So it's a triple whammy: credibility, it draws people to that testimonial. It's a Belisha beacon, big subliminal arrows. But also people will identify with being that person, so they can associate with them. So that bumps up the score for lots of reasons. Great. Sorry to interrupt, Gina.
Yeah, no, great. I was going to ask a question about history, but Sydney's asked, should LinkedIn replicate a CV or should they be different?
There's probably more qualification I need around that in terms of, does Sydney have their own business? Does I don't know if they're able to come back on that one.
Yes, the CV is more interesting for a younger person as an employee. And age has nothing to do with it, but I haven't quite done businesses yet. But
even if I would advocate it's different, because even if you're looking for a role, you still need to be saying what you can do for that next employer. So a CV is typically, yes, that you may you'd have a paragraph eulogizing as to the fabulous things you can do and have done, but often the traditional ones are bullet points of you are here for this amount of time, you raise...
And they're boring, aren't they? So in actual fact, the CV needs to upgrade to more the LinkedIn style, doesn't it? And in fact, if you have a really...
Depends on the employer. Depends on the employer.
Right.
So you've got to go with your target audience as to what they're looking for and what they want.
Yeah.
So there's lots of ifs and buts in that one, Sydney. So it depends. If you're going for a traditional corporate, I would imagine, you know, they do want to see where you've worked, that kind of list. So yeah, happily take a separate question on that with a bit more background as to where you're coming from to be more accurate.
Well, Sydney's saying he's looking for a job after 2 years unemployed.
Okay, so sign up for one of my free strategy sessions, because essentially I would say, okay, I recommend it should be different from a CV, because otherwise you could just send the CV in my view. You want it to stand out. So it needs to be punchy. A CV should be probably, some people say 2 pages most. Some people say 3, depending. I mean, if it's academic, then they usually look much longer.
Yeah. It depends, doesn't it? But
yeah, it depends on your target audience hugely. But it needs to stand out from all the other candidates. So you've got to bring something out there. So a listing isn't the most helpful, but if it's a corporate, they may want that. So
would you put a photo on a CV?
Well, I would say yes. Corporates will take them off anyway, because they can't be seen to be discriminate.
Oh,
but
yeah, you've got to be blind, haven't you?
Yeah, but I'd say put them in, and they can always take them off.
Yeah, the world has changed since I was looking for jobs a long time ago, but that's interesting. Let's see. Judy's saying, what's your view about connecting with people who contact you randomly on LinkedIn? It has to be a contact.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to go with your gut feel on these things, I find. So I will always ask, I mean, if they're not even a 3rd degree connection, I'm kind of like, what's that about? But if they do ask to connect, I will always put the majority of times, a personal message back saying, thanks for connecting. I'm always curious. What motivated you to press the connect button? Okay, so they may or may not answer, but it's kind of get a conversation going. And if they outright sell to me, I recommend that they come on one of my masterclasses, because for me, LinkedIn is very much about networking. It's not about in your face selling. And I do unfriend, disconnect with people if they're just blatant, you accept their connection and then they sell to you straight away. But it's horses for courses. Some people might be fine with that. So
all sorts of opportunities come from somebody from nowhere, and then we find that we have interesting links. I think on Facebook, a friend is different to the business arena. Primarily, this is business, and it's holding all your biography of business. And it's like when you learn about networking, it's not the people you know, it's the people they know. Absolutely. And they know. Absolutely. And it's that building that circle. So I think when you err on it, unless there's somebody is you really don't like them, I think it's a yes, because you're building your network, and your network possibilities of moving out, rippling out, aren't you?
But there's also an element of work in the same way you'd work a networking room. It's, I guess the point of LinkedIn is not to have, 10 billion contacts just sat there doing nothing. It's finding people that are in your tribe and who are in your specialist area. So whatever your industry or specialism is, you could be, connect with influencers, people who you aspire to, who write articles, because you can be learning and picking up the latest and greatest and all those sorts of things. So it's kind of a newspaper forum, if you like. So you can pick up some really, really interesting articles. So follow people you think would be interesting to help keep you up to date with the latest and greatest, who have got something really interesting to say. But if they seem totally out of your field, or I'd probably go with your gut feel, really. But do be brave. You never know. You can always kind of disconnect with them, unfriend them if you really, really are uncomfortable, if they or if something unusual starts occurring. But that's unlikely to be the case, to be fair. So hope that answers that question.
Okay. I've got a question about how because we, you know, I've flagged up the fact that you've had this life transition, you know,
Yes.
software and then something else. I think a lot of people are in that space. So if they, you know, I was an accountant, I've studied healing arts, I do web design, I'm a musician, you know, and in actual fact, now we find it more interesting that people are using different parts of their brain, presenting themselves as this more colourful person rather than, hang on a minute, it used to be, you're either this or you're that. And in Australia, they call them slashes. Web designer / accountant / whatever. How do we present ourselves where now it is more interesting to have all these strings to our bow? You know, a friend of mine is a barrister and runs an inspired stage events and is a jazz singer.
Oh, fantastic.
And you know, you think, well, my barrister's a singer, old school of thought.
Yes.
And then you think, and she's fantastic. I mean, she really is brilliant. So what do you think about having this quite colourful spectrum or wide spectrum of skills?
I hope she represents that on her LinkedIn profile.
Well, she's got it somewhere. She did actually lose a client because he saw her jazz picture, but his wife said, don't, and he came back and re-engaged her and told her at the end this story. She didn't know about this, and he apologized because he made this judgment about her when he saw the jazz singing.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, you know, your vibe attracts your tribe. So there's always going to be any business development person, any barrister, any lawyer, any communication specialist, there's always going to be a lot of competition. If you want to attract people like yourself or particular types of people, strangely enough, they will be attracted to the fact you're a jazz singer and a barrister stands you out from a whole load of other barristers in the case of your friend there.
Doesn't it?
So, you know, going back to that Google's zero moment of truth, the 7-11-4, if you've got, if you're happen to be looking for a barrister, strangely enough, the one who's the jazz singer might stick in your mind more than the 100 or so others that might be in the, dare I say, the telephone directory or on Google. So it's something that stands out, and it may not be something that, you know, as you say, the wife didn't really think that was a great thing, but that sorts out the wheat from the chaff, really. Do you want to attract people who are comfortable with that, or who are, you know, if they're not comfortable, they'll go elsewhere anyway? But I imagine she'll attract lots of people because she stands out fantastically.
More of a character. And you can, as you say with the images, you can have a range of images of yourself rather than just the list. So you begin to see the many aspects of people, which increasingly we are showing more of ourselves.
More comfortable with
the fact that we are, you know, presenting ourselves in different ways. And, you know, you point that the photograph of that man who seemed to be more compassionate. You can have a judgment about someone in business, and then you see that they're doing all this volunteering or traveling or taking time off, or I think, whoa, that expands their person, and that could be on their list, but it could also be in their photographs or images.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'd always recommend the primary photograph is definitely the head and shot photo, okay? You can have secondary images, which may be you meeting the Queen, or you meeting Nelson Mandela, or, you know, whatever that secondary, you running a marathon or whatever it is. Make sure those ones are the secondary images, rather than the profile photo should very much be the you face to face, looking at the camera, looking at your prospective client or employer or employee. But absolutely have those secondary images that show that extra dimension and some of those gems that you have in some of those stuff, because that's where the conversations start. The same way in a networking room, you talk about context typically. Oh, have you traveled far? Where have you come from? Because you're trying to get a sense of, you know, sense of geography. You're never likely to go and visit, you know, wherever they may say they live. But it's just that context, because then you have a conversation. Oh, my great aunt used to live there, or my mum lived there, or whatever it is. It's a conversation starter. So by having these things that stand you out, help that conversation, help that build that trust and rapport, essentially. And that's what it's typically around when it's businesses or services or yourself that you're trying to position and trying to kind of influence conversations. And so standing out, there's all those maxims, aren't there? You know, life's too short to kind of blend in type thing. So
you want to just put your screen so that we can see you talking, because we don't
Sure.
necessarily do that Q&A now.
Yeah.
There's a comment about how strategic should you be about LinkedIn contacts? Am I reading it right? Is it LinkedIn contacts? Have we answered that one? How strategic should be about LinkedIn contacts? I don't know whether they mean in looking for people. Cheryl.
Let's expand a little bit more on what you mean by
Cheryl,
that.
are you here?
Yeah, sorry.
Unmute yourself and talk to me.
Hi there. No, I was thinking more along the lines of, should you just connect with people that are in your field or places you want to go? And I think you sort of covered it earlier, just about using it as a network, and you can always unfriend them. But
Yes.
you know, is there a sort of amount of strategy you should apply to that?
Yeah, I mean, it does depend on your kind of what you're trying to achieve and who you're trying to get to. So, what field are you in, Cheryl?
Yeah, so a little bit like the other folks, a bit of a blending of a few things.
Okay.
So HSE, mindfulness and coaching, but the coaching and the mindfulness kind of sit together.
Yeah, okay. So evidently leaders in those different areas, it's worth being in contact with them. I'm sure you have contacts who are part of the Conscious Cafe, who are kind of LinkedIn contacts already, previous companies you've worked for, previous, your friends and family that you know, because it's that friend of a friend.
Yeah.
I mean, the tricky thing is with LinkedIn is the algorithms, a bit like Facebook. They're a law unto themselves, it seems. There's magic in there or other as to which circles you become part of. So sometimes you need to comment. So yes, work out which groups of people you're trying to reach.
Yeah.
And if they have something interesting to say, and they're in a totally different field, why not? Because you get ideas from different fields. That's sharing best practice. Probably not stay in a particular kind of narrow trench is a good thing to step outside of that. But one of the key tips is that comment. It's about interacting on LinkedIn. So you could be a static page, a bit like a static website. Unless you drive people to it or you start engaging, it's a bit pointless being on there. So like articles, but also comment this thing, it's getting engagement. And here's a tip: if you're commenting on somebody's article, tag their name in, because that causes waves. So that then goes to their contacts. So then you start appearing in there. So that gets more notice essentially. So if you've got something specific to say about the industry or about their article, tag them in, even though they've written it. That helps with the algorithms. But yeah, do interact with people and say that was a great article. But it doesn't always have to be, it's not Facebook. Okay, so yeah, furry cats and fluffy dogs and all the rest of it probably not on LinkedIn. It doesn't always have to be severely old-fashioned barrister style serious. So you can be who you are on there, but do comment, engage, share interesting articles that are in your field. Write your own blogs or write your own articles if you can. That adds value. But I mean, I was talking to a lady yesterday who this probably sounds a tiny bit Facebooky. You might be able to get away with it in lockdown, as everyone needs a bit more distraction. And she said she's got the most views when she posted a video of her daughter, who's a gymnast, who's like, I don't know, 20 something, I think, who was doing a kind of headstand. So she got lots of views of that. So, but she needs to engage afterwards, So yes, you've got a lot of views. Having views is kind of vanity, if you like. But you've got to engage with those people afterwards as part of that follow-up. And say, yeah, it was good fun. Da, da, da.
So maybe just for another question, can I, if you just ask, how much engagement on LinkedIn should you do, say, per week?
I know some people at the moment who are doing an hour a day in the morning. Now, because their business is quiet, okay, so they've got a bit of a captive audience, and they're not selling, okay. They're offering free masterclasses and he's getting the conversations going.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So once things get back to semi-normal, that may be a different thing, but he's spending an hour a day in terms of contacting specifically, social media wise, LinkedIn specifically, in communication with his clients. So, I mean, mine does vary, to be honest. I don't have a strict regime, but you know, I dip in here and yeah, I'll be on it every day for sure. You know, checking out what's going on, seeing who's got new roles and new jobs, because it's keeping the plate spinning.
Right. Yeah.
But it is a quite a science using it, and our focus today has been creating the profile, hasn't it, rather than how to use it. That's a whole other area, so it's a great question, but it is a big area of how you can use it, you know, with your own goals. I was going to ask you about length of video, but Tim's asking a question: are you a member of any specialist LinkedIn groups and suggest using them?
Specialist LinkedIn groups? No, is the answer.
Do you want to expand on what you mean by that? Either take mute off or type in here what you mean about.
I do know LinkedIn groups aren't as good as they used to be.
No.
But you may be in different groups that are super active and are working fluidly and beautifully. I find LinkedIn groups a little bit cumbersome to get around, to be honest. So, for example, I just set up something called SME Force for Good, which you may be interested in. And we specifically chose Facebook because it's just more agile, using a horrible tech word in some ways. But it's just easier to communicate.
Everybody seems to be not on Facebook, but in a Facebook group. So you could not be a Facebook user, but you know, happening wherever. And then there's the Facebook group that brings the people together. So it is, you're right. I'm a member of a business Facebook group and never go there. Nothing ever happens. Yeah. For whatever reason, but we are alive on Facebook. More pity.
I know some people, a particular business where their thing is they help individuals target particular businesses and individuals, and then but create a community. But they're in charge of creating the content and keeping those conversations going. Okay, so as a dedicated group that you may set up, then that may work, but in the same way a Facebook community group may work. You
have to lead it and curate it, don't you? You need to put energy, otherwise it's
feeding it. Otherwise, as you say, like, well, any of them, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn, you need to feed it. So you do need you need energy, time to do that and keep it consistent. Otherwise, if you've created those wonderful contacts and then it all falls flat, you know, they're going to, as part of that customer journey, they're going to remember that. Well, they're going to go, oh yeah, that went somewhere that disappeared, didn't it? So, you know, yeah.
We've had a lot of people say they've been interested in all the comments, and I was just going to ask about length of video. Is there, if we're going to put videos on as part of our shop window, is there a length of time that those videos should be?
A minute.
Okay, a minute video.
We're talking around that sort of time, because even on Instagram, you've got Instagram TV, which you can have, you know, a full length, you know, 30-minute type thing on there. But Instagram is less than a minute if you're actually just posting a video on Instagram. So that gives you a real clue as to attention spans. So absolutely short and punchy. So you might have a taster that's a minute, and then you might have a longer video, the kind of fuller version, a bit like, you know, cinema films where you have the trailers and then you have the real thing.
Trailer, I think of it like a trailer. That's
absolutely
it. We're leading them in, aren't we? We're bringing them
absolutely
in.
So it's very much that warm up. So short and punchy is really important, and then you can lead them to the kind of fuller in-depth material that you have.
Okay, well, we're coming up to the last 2 or 3 minutes of our session, so I just want to say, on behalf of everybody, a big thank you, Denise, because I think people we can all wave and clap, can't we? Everybody can say thank you.
Well, thank you. Pleasure, an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, there's a lot there for people to think about. You provided a lot of resources as well, so thank you so much for that. That is absolutely brilliant. I'm going to flag up and ask Judy. Judy, do you want to talk about the next event? We have another event coming up, don't we? I'm going to unmute you. You can unmute yourself faster than I can unmute you.
I can unmute. There we go.
We've both unmuted it. Everybody's. We've done. So Judy, do you want to talk about the next Conscious Cafe?
We've got all kinds of projects in the pipeline now that we have the opportunity to connect with so many of you online. But the next thing that is definitely for your diaries is on Sunday week. Tomorrow, Alpha Off is going to facilitate a conversation on the topic of death and dying, because we feel that in the tradition of death cafes, which some of you may have heard of, which are quite popular in the UK, people want to talk about it, but they're not sure who to talk about it with. And there are so many different aspects to it, some of which are very practical. And we want to offer you this opportunity to have time in a safe space to explore what you might want to share and what your thoughts and feelings are. And this is very much what we do specialize in at Conscious Cafe, which is giving people the opportunity to talk about ideas, thoughts, the things that have meaning in our world that there isn't always a space for in your lives. So if you go to our website, www.consciouscafe.org, you will find the details of tomorrow's event. So we look forward to seeing you there soon. Thank you for coming today.
Great, Judy, that's fantastic. And if you wanted to make a donation on that same Conscious Cafe website, there's a slash, I think it's donate, and you can do that. And if you were around for our last event, which was Lynn McTaggart, and you were interested in that, there's something about that on the website. People can listen to the recording, can't they, Judy?
Yeah, they definitely can, but we are asking everyone for a donation because everybody who came to the webinar donated.
And it was fantastic. It absolutely was fantastic. If you weren't there and you're not sure what it was about, it's really her scientific research over 20 years about how miracles are created. And she has a book called The Power of Eight. And if you're interested in being part of the Power of Eight, then contact Conscious Cafe or your local cafe. So I think that's it. We've had a great lunch session here, haven't we? I'm going to go and have my lunch now. So we've got, you'll email everybody with the links. And Denise, thank you. A lot of work there, lots of food for thought, and really, really practical for people now to create fantastic LinkedIn profiles.
Thank you very much, everybody. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Gina. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. I'm going to see how I can download the chat. I'm not sure I need to.
I'll download if all else fails. I'll have a copy of it.
You're going to download it, are you? Before I'm going to stop
it should
recording.
Download anyway.
Recording. Yeah. I'm stopping it now.